Now that the Panthers are pretty much done with free agency, can they finally prioritize extending Derrick Brown? Like, what are we waiting for here?
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here on the show answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me to get your questions in for this week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets of any winning $5 bet. That's $200 if your first bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. All right, so think back to January when we were looking at the offseason, trying to figure out who the Carolina Panthers are going to hire as their next GM, who they're going to hire as their head coach, and all the moves they may make, and all the moves that, honestly, you and I wanted the Panthers to make this offseason. I made a offseason to-do list. I've done this the last couple of off seasons. It's a great way to kind of map out how I'd like things to go for the Carolina Panthers as they approach what seems to be the annual coaching cycle, hiring a new head coach and hiring a new general manager, and also how they go about free agency and then how they go about the draft. Free agency's basically over at this point in time. The Panthers made a couple of recent signings, like Josh Nijman being signed to be the Carolina Panthers swing tackle. They also appear to be signing Justin Sturdad from the Broncos, but then he said, no, I'm staying in Denver. So there goes a veteran backup linebacker for the Carolina Panthers. They'll continue to look for that. And they're hosting some individuals like Michael Gallup, who could potentially be a veteran wide receiver on this roster. So not any major signings. Maybe Jadeveon Clowney could be a major signing for the Carolina Panthers, but we'll see what else materializes as they continue to start to fill out what has to be a 90-man roster by the time they get right here to Charlotte for training camp, as they're no longer doing the whole Wofford thing down in Spartanburg, which is unfortunate. And of course, the focus is now going to be on the draft with pro days going on. And of course, the draft taking place at the end of next month in Detroit. So today I want to update that offseason to-do list that I put out there in January. I want to look at the items that the Panthers have actually done, the items that they still have not done, and also some of the things that they never checked off the list because some of those players are no longer here in Carolina. So let's start off with the successful items for the Carolina Panthers. Well, we know that they hired a general manager and they hired a head coach. A lot of people were skeptical of the Dan Morgan hire, and I get it. He's been here throughout the 14 and 37 tenure that Scott Fitterer oversaw here in Carolina. He was the head of the scouting department. What moves was he in favor of? What moves was he against? We do now know that Brian Burns, the trade that the Carolina Panthers rejected when the Rams offered 2 first-round picks and a day 2 pick, Dan Morgan was in favor of not taking that compensation. So can he really get a pass for the lack of compensation he got from Brian Burns when he traded him last week? In my opinion, not really, even though he wasn't the main decision maker. He was on board at the Panthers keeping Brian Burns. Samir Suleiman, by the way, the former cap guy in Carolina, he wanted to move Brian Burns, and he did not get his way, and he's no longer here in Carolina. I think overall, Dan has done an okay job to start off. I like the Deontay Johnson trade. Actually, I love the Deontay Johnson trade to move on from Dante Jackson, who you were going to cut, to only give up a 6th-round pick for a starting wide receiver. Now, will Deontay Johnson perform on the field? To be determined. Will Deontay Johnson be here past this season in Carolina? To be determined. But is this an effort to help Bryce Young? Absolutely. And for that, I'm going to give Dan Morgan a passing grade. Now, of course, TBD on how that actually works out on the field. I appreciate that the restructuring of contracts not happening anymore. Ian Thomas, somehow still here in Carolina, had his deal restructured. Everyone else, No restructures, kept kicking the can down the road. Part of the reason why Dante Jackson is no longer here in Carolina. They can't do that. You keep trying to do that, and you keep building 5-win, 7-win, 2-win rosters here in Carolina. Makes no sense. Dan Morgan said they weren't going to do that, and they have not done that. The Panthers also made a coup by adding Brant Tillis from Kansas City with the Chiefs, where he was the one who's a lead negotiator in that monster deal Patrick Mahomes signed a couple years ago. He's now in the role of EVP and of football operations. So what he's been able to do, working with the salary cap and with the contracts in concert with Dan Morgan, has been a positive for the Carolina Panthers over the last 2 weeks of free agency going on. And even before that, as they prepared for free agency. So they hired a general manager in Dan Morgan. He's also the president of football operations. I think Dan so far has done an all right job, and I feel good about where things are heading into the draft. They hired a head coach in Dave Canales, only spent 1 year in Tampa Bay as their offensive coordinator. He's only been a play caller 1 year in the NFL. That is something that I would like to see as far as how that's going to go, and I'm sure everyone's going to be keen to find out how great of a play caller he is once he gets to Carolina. We already know his reputation. Got Baker Mayfield paid, got Geno Smith paid. Now can he turn things around for Bryce Young? And, of course, get him paid and have him be the franchise quarterback here long-term in Carolina. The next item I wanted to see after that was the Carolina Panthers to franchise tag Brian Burns. At that point in time, in January, I did not feel like the Carolina Panthers were going to come to terms with Brian Burns ahead of free agency. And as we got closer to free agency, and really once we were in the 2-week period of the Carolina Panthers having the opportunity to franchise tag Brian Burns, it never felt like the two sides were ever going to be close enough for a new deal to materialize. And once that did not happen, and the Panthers slapped the $24 million tag of Brian Burns, it felt like to me that it was inevitable that he would no longer be a Carolina Panther. And that, of course, is the case as the Panthers trade him away to the Giants for a second, a fifth-round swap this year, and a fifth-rounder in 2025. Unfortunate when 2 firsts and a second or third were on the board a couple years ago, and your current general manager was on board with not trading for that, and this is the best that you could do. The fortunate thing is they did get something for Brian Burns. Joe Shane was in Buffalo at the time where Dan Morgan was there under Brandon Beane. They have a working relationship, and that's important to have a general manager that's been in Seattle, that's been in New York, that knows other people across the league, as those friendships can pay dividends. And I think the Panthers maybe got more than they would have gotten. I don't know if they do the fifth-round pick swap or the 2025 fifth-rounder without that relationship. Either way, it is not it's not a first rounder. We know that. It's also not the equivalent of a first rounder. They didn't get as much for Burns as they gave up to get a guy like Sam Darnold. They gave up a second, a fourth, and a sixth to get Sam Darnold, and they only got a second, swapping fifth, and a future fifth for Brian Burns. So that certainly is a low mark for Dan Morgan. It's not all on him. It's really on the organization as a whole to have not operated that situation better. As far as Brian Burns is no longer here, there's a gaping hole there at the edge rusher spot. Yes, they've brought in DJ Woodham, they brought in Caleb Chase on, they are targeting Jadeveon Clowney. None of those players are up to par and up to the standard that Brian Burns is so far in the NFL. It's unfortunate to see that happen. They did franchise tag him, did what I wanted, but they did not extend him. So there is that. Signing a veteran corner. I want the Panthers to do that. They so far have done it by bringing in Dane Jackson. Speaking of those past relationships, Dan Morgan being in Buffalo, he was somebody who was pounding the table a couple years ago for Dane Jackson, a 7th-rounder out of Pitt, to come to the Bills. They drafted him, and he came in, and he ended up being the 3rd corner for Buffalo 2 years ago. Had to start the majority of the games with Tre'Davious White, who was often injured up there, being out for the season, and was okay. He's now getting the opportunity to compete for the starting job. I still want to see the Panthers possibly draft somebody to compete with him. Would like to see another veteran corner come to Carolina as well. But right now, Dane Jackson, he is the corner opposite of J.C. Horn, has ties to Dan Morgan. I like that. All right, cutting Hayden Hurst was the next thing. The Panthers just really bungled free agency last year. DJ Chark was a miss. Demir Bird ended up being a miss as he got injured. Hayden Hurst, Miles Sanders, miss. Did not help out Bryce Young the way that a lot of us thought they had. Well, they tried their best. Let's understand this. Once they trade away DJ Moore, there's only so much the organization really could do with a poor receiving market. When you look at tight ends, it's one of those things where, and I've had the conversation with y'all on the show before, look at Houston, look at Carolina. The Texans, they get D'Amico Ryans, they get CJ Stroud. Panthers, David Tepper in particular, never interested in D'Amico Ryans. D'Amico Ryans knew that, so he didn't want to come over here and help David Tepper check the box for the Rooney Rule. Never interviewed. The Panthers could have taken CJ Stroud. They didn't do that. The Panthers, they could have got Dalton Schultz last year, and they didn't. Schultz has a great year. He re-signs at Houston. The Panthers get Hayden Hurst instead. He's no good. He now goes to Chargers, and he leaves a $9.8 million dead cap hit for the Carolina Panthers. So the Panthers could have had D'Amico, could have had CJ, and they could have had Dalton Schultz. Instead, they got Frank, who's no longer here. They got Bryce, who I still believe in, and I'm not sitting here saying it's the wrong decision. Just we know how things played out last year in Houston and how they played out in Carolina, and they could have had Schultz, which definitely that was a mistake not getting him over Hayden Hurst, who was no good for the Panthers last year. The Panthers, by the way, currently have the fourth most dead money in the NFL, $46 million, only behind the Vikings, Chargers, and Packers. Finally, the other thing the Panthers have done so far on my to-do list is fix the offensive line. Thank God, they signed Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis to priority free agent deals to be the starting right guard and left guard, respectively. They've moved Austin Corbett from right guard into center. See how that goes. Very interested, of course, in how that works out. They're keeping Ike Ekwonu at left tackle, which is something I wanted to see. Had a long episode back in January about the Ike Ekwonu problem, if you felt like it was a problem, and how the Carolina Panthers could go about it this offseason. Dan Morgan believes in Ike, so Ike is staying out there at left tackle. Brady Christensen is now a depth piece, can be used as a tackle, can be used as the first guard off the bench if something were to happen to Hunt or Lewis. Yosh Nijman was signed to a 2-year deal where $15 million max. He's clearly the swing tackle for the Carolina Panthers. Christensen still can play that position as a tackle if needed, but also could be the depth, and that pushes guys like Cade Mays and Chandler Zavala down the depth chart, allows them more time to develop here in Carolina under Joe Gilbert and this new Carolina Panthers offensive coaching staff. So that is the items so far that have been checked off. There are still remaining items on the list, and the top item is extending Derrick Brown. What are you waiting for, Panthers? Let's not do this again. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. Today is the best day of the year. The NCAA tournament, March Madness, is finally here. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. And for the first time ever in the state of North Carolina, we have legal sports gambling. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers, and that probably is you, get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Here's some free advice. Bet on a number one seed. I know it's happened twice. Happened last year with Purdue. Bet on a one seed, $5, $200 in bonus bets right there. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut the nets down. The Panthers have done a good job so far. Great job, Dave. Great job, Dan. Great job, Brand, in checking off some of the boxes on my to-do list so far this offseason. But you still have some work left to do, y'all, this offseason. And the top priority for me right now, we're sitting here. It's March 21st, Thursday. We are technically we're like 8 days into free agency. Really, it's like 10 days and maybe even before that, as there's been some teams out there that are being investigated for tampering, as these deals are coming out way too quickly once you hit noon on that legal negotiating period on that Monday back on the 11th. Either way, free agency, it's basically over. The Panthers have spent the money they're going to spend on high-price free agents. They're now going out there and getting the bottom-of-the-barrel players to be depth pieces and hoping that they can get a guy like Jadeveon Clowney to come in and start as an edge rusher. Totally understand that, but we're past that. The focus now is on the draft. But the focus before they get to the draft, which is still over a month away, should be on keeping one of your best players here for the long term. The Panthers have made a real nasty habit of trading away their successful first-round picks. First was Christian McCaffrey. They get the quarterback decision wrong with Sam Darnold. They get Baker Mayfield wrong. The team's terrible, so they think to themselves, damn, We got to trade Christian. We got to be able to get some draft picks. There's no reason to be paying a running back $16 million a year if we're going to be this bad. And I understood where they were coming from, but they got to that position because they kept getting the quarterback wrong. And this team just kept doing things the wrong way. Never focused on actually building a roster, just trying to cut corners and get a quarterback, which I understand. Yes, if you don't have a good quarterback, you don't have a chance at all in this league to have high level success. But still, if you can't block anybody and you can't protect and you can't get after the passer, which currently the Panthers last year couldn't block, they couldn't get after the passer, you don't have a chance anyways. It's a line of scrimmage game. The Panthers not concerned about that. Let's go out there and get a terrible quarterback in Sam Darnold. Oh, damn, let's go trade him and get Matt Corral, who's not in the league. Let's go out there and let's get Baker Mayfield and not give him any time to actually get acclimated. And we saw that worked out. So what did that lead him to do? Trade away Chris McCaffrey, who's been fantastic and it's finally been healthy. Now, plenty of you out there listening and watching the show right now are sitting there maybe rolling your eyes, but you also are someone who back in 2020 was complaining, bitching, and moaning on Twitter, being like, McCaffrey's always hurt. We got to trade him. And now you're like, oh, I wish McCaffrey was here. BS, man. I hate the people who do that. And those are the same people who last week were giddy about Burns bleeding. And then once they watch how bad this edge rush is this season, they're going to be like, damn, maybe we should have kept Brian Burns. Don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear a single complaint from any of those people who do it. But I know that you're going to do it because you've done it before. And I bet you like Kyle Allen back in the past too. Back to my point. The Panthers have made a nasty habit of trading away their good first-round picks. McCaffrey no longer here. DJ Moore, I don't think anyone was a fan of that. Like, if anyone was a fan of that, giving up more in that Bryce Young trade, why were you a fan of that? Because that ended up being a disaster for Bryce Young and for the Panthers offense last year. And we just saw last week they trade away Brian Burns. And there are people who are happy about it. People who are not happy about it. I'm not happy about it. The return's certainly not nearly enough. And it's going to be a problem. You look at what they have right now, DJ Woonem, you can hype him up all you want. The guy's coming off a torn quad injury, and he was playing opposite of Danielle Hunter, and that really helped him out with the 8 sacks. You look at his PFF grades as far as his pass rush grade, it is not good. We'll see what he looks like. He's still a young player with a chance to develop, so I'm going to think positive, just pointing out some of the facts out there. You also look at K'Lavon Chaisson. Don't think anybody's really expecting a lot about him anyways. Bust so far. And Clowney, even if he comes here, he's 31. He's been an inconsistent player. It's not like he's going to be here for the long haul. Anyways, Brian Burns would have been that player. The Panthers did not pay him. They need to extend Derrick Brown. Derrick Brown has done everything that you would want out of a player. He's come in, been a good part of the community. He's played well, got to a Pro Bowl level. He's a leader within that locker room. Pay the man his money. Don't mess around. Don't do this again. Let's not play the franchise tag game. Let's not alienate a player. Let's not have fans out here who are ungrateful, fickle as hell, out here dog cussing him because he wants to get paid for what he does for a living. My God, imagine wanting to get compensated fairly for what you do at work. Hey, you do that in your regular life. I really hope if you're someone who really hated Brian Burns wanting to get paid, I get it. $30 million, a lot. Wouldn't really want to give that much up, but understanding where he was coming from. If you're somebody who wants to get paid what you feel like you deserve, I hope you don't get it because you were right there sitting there saying, no, Brian Burns doesn't deserve it. Ridiculous. The Panthers can open up $8.4 million of salary cap space if they extend Derrick Brown. Is that super important right now? Yes, maybe, no, I don't know. But for me, just extend them. That cap space is great to have, and they can start to figure out what it's going to look like down the road as they continue to try to rebuild this roster. Just more importantly, sign your good players. Keep your good players. They have not done that, and I'm sick of talking about them not doing it. I'm sick of watching them continue to suck when they don't do it. So keep your good players. It's not that hard. The next item they still need to do is acquire a number 1 wide receiver. They didn't do it so far in free agency. Now, Mike Evans, who would have been a clear target, was not available. He signed a new deal in Tampa. Good for him. Michael Pittman Jr., who's not on the same level as Mike Evans, he was franchise tagged and re-signed in Indianapolis. The Panthers did not get Hollywood Brown, who I don't think is the number 1 receiver anyways. And then who was the other? Calvin Ridley. He signed a massive deal with the Tennessee Titans. Didn't seem to be super interested in coming to Carolina. And I don't know if they were going to give him the $90 million that he got from Tennessee. And the other one is T. Higgins, who the Panthers can still trade for. And I would still like to see the Carolina Panthers be interested in that. The thing about the Bengals, though, They're not a team that just bends to the will of a player. Last year, Jonah Williams said, I want out. They told him to shut up. He shut up. He played well. Now he's out in Arizona as a starting left tackle. Again, T. Higgins, they're probably going to do the same thing. They're trying to win a Super Bowl with Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and what's a pretty damn good defense led by Lou Anarumo, their DC. They're going to tell him to just be quiet for now. And maybe if things really get to the point where they don't think it's going to work out, where it's been a year, according to Higgins' camp, since they've talked about an extension, possibly closer to the draft, the Bengals can start to look at some teams that they could trade him to. The Panthers should be a team in line for T. Higgins. Deontay Johnson, though, coming to Carolina is a start. I don't look at him as a true number one wide receiver. I look at him as a very good number two wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers down the road. I think he's a really good player right now. He's the de facto number one, just like last year Adam Thielen was a number one. I don't think he's a true number one alpha kind of guy. And you could question whether T. Higgins is that as well. And I would totally understand it. He's a massive upgrade from what the Panthers had last year, effectively replacing DJ Chark. I just don't see him as a true number one. The Panthers still need to identify that true number one. Now, whether they do that by trading for T. Higgins or all of a sudden someone like a Brandon Ayuk becomes available, the next item on my list, they need to draft a wide receiver, whether it's at 33 or 39. And that is one of the benefits to trading away Brian Burns. They get another pick in the top 40 right there, top of the second round at pick 39 for the Giants, whether it's 33 or 39. For me, one of those picks feels like it needs to be a wide receiver. Thielen, 34 this year. He's got one more year in his deal after this season. I don't know if he's going to be sticking around, and I've already brought this up to y'all on the show. I'm not quite certain we're going to see last year's Adam Thielen this year. I'm willing to bet he's not going to have another 100-plus reception season, another 1,000-yard receiving season. He could have 4 touchdowns again. I can see that, but the numbers he put up before that, hard time seeing that, especially now with a real receiver in Deontay Johnson here in Carolina. Not a Jonathan Mingo fan. I am not. Terrace Marshall, so don't know whether he's going to even make the roster at all. Amir Smith-Marset. Okay, that's great that he's here. I suppose they need somebody who can be a price long-term. The hope is that Mingo can be that. I think you're hoping more than actually that is a plan that you can really lean on. They need to draft somebody at 33 or 39 to be a wide receiver, especially right now that they haven't signed a true number one and that they still need to add to that position group. And if they bring in Michael Gallup, still do it. Because Michael Gallup is, again, not a long-term option for the Carolina Panthers. The next item on the list, and this was actually tied to the Hayden Hurst item previously, cut Miles Sanders. The Panthers have not done so, and their hands have been pretty tied when it comes to this. He received a $2 million roster bonus last Saturday. Why? How is that possible, you ask? Because the Panthers would have lost $2.7 million in cap space if they cut him pre-June 1. Right now, the Panthers are going to keep Miles Sanders on the roster, see how he fits into the offense during the offseason program, and post-draft, they can look at where things stand and decide whether they want to keep him around. If they do get rid of him post-June 1, $200,000 designation. Now, they could have done a post-June 1 designation for Miles Sanders before. It's possible that Dave Canales and his coaching staff likes Miles Sanders. Right now, I am just scratching my head on whether that truly is the case and how that could be the case after last season. Certainly possible that he could have a bounce back year and pair up with Chuba Hubbard. We get a new smash and dash here in Carolina. I think it's unlikely that we even get to the point where he's in Carolina come the end of July once they report the training camp here in Uptown Charlotte. But eventually, I think they're going to cut Miles Sanders. That's still on my list. I would say just draft a running back and then move on from Miles Sanders, because last year of Chuba Hubbard's deal, and Miles Sanders wasn't good enough for you last year. And he's an aging player at a position where once those guys have a lot of miles on them, they're not pretty useful moving forward. So get a new running back in the draft. Final item that I need the Panthers to do is draft a cornerback. This kind of goes to 33 and 39 as well. There's a healthy debate right now over what's the priority at 33 and at 39. Is it wide receiver and edge? Is it wide receiver and corner? Is it cornerback and edge? Is it wide receiver, edge, corner? You can argue for any of those. You can maybe even throw in tight end if you want. If you're feeling frisky, I probably wouldn't do that, but I'm sure somebody out there wants to. They need to draft a corner. They tried C.J. Henderson, didn't work out. Dante Jackson, no longer here. JC Horn right now, big question mark for me. And I talked about this with Mike Kay of the Charlotte Observer, whether they're going to exercise that fifth-year option. I don't think that that's something they should do. I get if they do it, it's $11 million compared to if he stays healthy, plays well, and he's a good player when healthy. You want to keep him around anyways. It would be $18 million to franchise tag him. That's a $7 million difference, which is not insignificant when it comes to the salary cap, especially as that is all guaranteed on the salary cap. They don't have anybody who's under contract past the season. And JC is a good player, but oh boy, you got to figure out what they're going to do there. Dane Jackson, I guess, is under contract, so they just signed him, but that's something they can easily get out of if Dane Jackson doesn't play well enough for the Panthers this year. They need a long-term option, and they need to go out and corner and the draft rather and draft the corner and have somebody under a 4-year contract who can be a starter for this team, whether it's on the outside or in that nickel position, which apparently this is a really good draft for a nickel corner. The Panthers need to draft a corner. So extend Derrick Brown, give him your money, give him his money. Still find a way to find a wide receiver at number one wide receiver, draft a wide receiver, get rid of Miles Sanders, get a corner. Those are the remaining items I need to see the Carolina Panthers do throughout the rest of this offseason. There are some failed items, though, and one of them certainly is heartbreaking. The other one, I don't think you would have thought as much, but I'm thinking about it now, looking at the team he signed with, and damn, the Panthers really did miss out on him. We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. This next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. So we've looked at the items the Carolina Panthers have so far checked off on my list, like hiring a general manager. Welcome to Carolina again, Dan Morgan, as you are already here in the building. A nice hallway promotion for our boy who was outstanding in the Super Bowl back in 2003 against the Patriots. They've also gone out there and hired a head coach, Dave Canales, and they've done some other moves. They still have some things I'd like for them to do, like extending Derrick Brown and no longer getting rid of your good players. And now there are some items I want to go over that the Panthers did not do that were originally on my list. One quick thing I should mention on the original list, and this just goes back to the locker room cleanout day and kind of just reading the room. I wasn't in the room, but just reading tweets and kind of how things were expressed. Adam Thielen, I pointed out, trade Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen, it just sounded like locker room cleanout day, did not appear to be happy about how things went in 2023. How could he? He came to a team after winning 13 games, and they won 2 games. The coaching staff that he signed with, they're no longer in the building. I can understand why Adam Thielen would be frustrated. At age 33, had a great season. Going to be 34 this year. He doesn't have much time left in the NFL, y'all. Does he want to waste it being on the worst football team in the NFL? Unfortunately, that is his reality because I still don't think the Panthers are going to be that much better here in 2024. I felt like back then, yeah, it may not help Bryce Young, but the Panthers really need to find people who are going to be long-term answers anyways at the wide receiver position. And you could still argue to this day that with Deontay Johnson, the Panthers could trade Adam Thielen and just use pick 33 and 39 on 2 young receivers. And there you go. Now those 2 receivers have to actually be good because last year when they drafted a receiver at 39, he was not good. So that should be the priority is if you're going to draft somebody there, make sure that they're not as bad as Mingo was last year. And, well, you only are going to know once they get there, but could have told you what was going to happen based off of what he did in college, which really wasn't anything. And should you be overly, should you be overly, I guess, stuck on the production in college? Yes and no. I saw this tweet out there from Benjamin Albright, who's been on the show before, where he's talking about fans and media seem to be really obsessed over college production, where the NFL, they're more looking at the traits. Okay, cool. Look at the traits. He has the traits, but he didn't produce in the college level, and he hasn't produced so far. So the traits are awesome, man. Being big, being strong has really gotten him far as a wide receiver. Can you run routes? Can you get open? Can you catch the damn football? So far, no. So if you can't do any of that, what's the point of being 6'2", 215? That's just my point out there. So you could make the argument that they could still trade Adam Thielen and they could go out there and draft receivers at 33 and 39. Would that be the best plan? I'll leave you to decide. But right now, I don't think that's something they should do. But that's something I just wanted to point out, that he did not sound like he was a happy camper and may have been on the verge of requesting a trade, which never did happen. If it did happen, that has not been reported. The two failed items, though, on this list that I had back in January were to re-sign Frankie Louvu and to re-sign Yetur Gross-Matos. As we know, Frankie Louvu signed a 3-year, $36 million deal with the Commies up in Washington. The Panthers reportedly offered more, but Louvu chose Washington, which is really the gut punch that the Panthers were willing to spend what Louvu wanted, and he still said no to them. I understand. He sat there last year. They were 2-15. They're going through a coaching staff change, and he's going to Washington. It's going to be a new coaching staff for him as well. I get that. But he's going through a coaching staff change for the third time in Carolina. He was here when Matt Rule was here. Phil Snow's the one who brought him. Then he had to go through the change where it was Steve Wilkes who took over momentarily. Then it was Frank Reich. Now it's a coaching staff with Dave Canales. I can understand why he would want to have some stability, which I think is going to happen in Washington with Dan Quinn. And I can also understand where he just rather put himself in a situation where he feels like he's going to best succeed. And he thinks maybe that is in Dan Quinn's system. And I would love to see. I am excited to see what Dan Quinn will be able to do with him. I wish it would have happened here in Carolina under Rogério Rivero, but unfortunately, that's not the case. And for Dan Morgan to come out and talk about we need dogs, and like Frankie Louvu clearly fits that dog mentality that he is bringing up, that he wants in these players, and he fits the mold of all the great Carolina Panther linebackers. Not saying he was ever going to be a Luke Kuechly or he was ever going to be a Sam Mills and a Hall of Fame linebacker, but he could have been a damn good linebacker here for the Carolina Panthers over the next 3+ seasons. It sucks it didn't work out. He's gone. The Panthers offer more money. He said no. It is what it is. You tried. Yetur Gross-Matos, though, that's one that I was surprised that he signed a 2-year, $18 million deal with the Niners. Like, that's a lot of money for a guy who really hasn't produced that much. Former second-round pick, that helps as far as just the way NFL teams are going to look at him and understand that these teams, when they are evaluating players for agency, and it's something that Dave Canales brought up, that they go back and look at what their scouting was of that player back in the drafts. The 49ers, it's the same staff. They probably look back at 2020 and look to see, hey, what do we think about Gross-Matos back then? Then they looked at him this past season and they wondered, okay, he's been more of a guy who's been a down lineman in a 4-man front. He had to play an odd front last year, and he actually played pretty well compared to what a lot of people expected. And that's yours truly, as far as being a odd scheme fit, having a career year with his sack total, now bringing him to San Francisco, where they are always looking for some depth there along the defensive line, and give him some money and see how things work out. Steve Wilkes is not there anymore. They have a new defensive coordinator. So there's not even the Steve Wilkes connection. It's just Niners, a competitive team, a team that was just at the Super Bowl, a team that's annually in the NFC title game, that wanted to pay Yetur Gross-Matos. The Panthers were interested in bringing him back. Of course, they didn't. And that just kind of goes to show you that, man, they really missed out. If the Niners wanted him, the Panthers surely should have been a team that wanted to keep Yetur Gross-Matos here in Carolina. So those two ones, difficult to see, especially with Louvu, that the Panthers offered more money and he said no. Gross-Matos, to see where he went and how much he got. I don't know if the Panthers are going to offer that much. Now it's worth $18 million. Doesn't mean he's going to get $18 million, likely only a 1-year deal based on how he actually plays out there in the Bay. But still, Gross-Matos is a Niner. That man really upgraded here in Carolina. So that's it. That's my to-do list. And I will, of course, update it once we get post-draft. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all, subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, on Twitter at Julian Council, where I'll be back with you tomorrow. That's Friday, to answer your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So right now, as I'm wrapping up the show and you're listening to this or watching this, DM me. It's right there on the screen for YouTube. You know my Twitter handle if you listen to the podcast. Go DM me. Give me your questions, and let's get to it on tomorrow's show. But in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding, and I'll talk to y'all on Friday.